In the late 1970s, Boston was one of the biggest rock bands on the planet. Their debut album was a string of hits: More Than a Feeling, Long Time, Peace of Mind. By 1977, they were releasing a private plane and touring with the likes of Black Sabbath. And then, almost inexplicably, they disappeared. After the second album, Don't Look Back, was released in 1978, Boston's founder and mastermind, Tom Scholz, went quiet. It would take 8 years for the band's next album, Third Stage, to arrive. So, what happened to Boston during that lost decade? I'm Brendan Borrell, the author of Power Soak. If you ask people in the music industry, they'll often tell you the same thing: Tom Scholz was difficult. That's not my judgment. That's how others described him, under oath. I spoke to John Boylan, the co-producer of Boston's debut album. Before getting into any specifics, he wanted to acknowledge something more basic.
You know what they say, there are three sides to every story: yours, mine, and the truth.
One side of that story came out in 1991, during one of Scholz's many lawsuits, when Boylan was asked about Scholz's personality. I categorized him as your classic, overly focused genius personality. Boylan testified, everything was subservient to getting his creative vision forward. Boylan said Scholz could be thin-skinned, that sometimes he took offense where others would let things slide. Given that portrait, it's tempting to see Scholz as the problem, the brilliant but prickly perfectionist who alienated everyone around him. But when I started reporting Power Soak, that explanation felt incomplete. To understand Scholz's distrust of the music industry, you have to go back, before Boston even had a record deal. In November 1975, Scholz signed a management contract with Paul Ahern, a California promoter who had bunked with Glenn Frey of the Eagles and helped turn Fleetwood Mac into an American sensation. He was part dreamer, part hustler, all believer who was ready for his big break. On paper, the management deal he offered Scholz looked standard. Ahern would take 20% of Scholz's gross income. That included touring, television appearances, and so on. But buried underneath it were two separate royalty arrangements, one for the songs Scholz wrote and one for the recordings themselves. So the songwriting deal gave Ahern's publishing company 50% of anything Scholz wrote for the next 5 years. Now, that was an unusually bad arrangement at the time, but it was only the beginning. The recording contract was somehow even worse. Boston was promised 12% royalties, except only on 90% of albums sold, thanks to something called a free goods clause. In practice, that meant the band earned 10.8%. So such clauses weren't all that uncommon at the time. But remember, Scholz didn't even have his record deal yet. And that's where things get kind of funny. Ahern negotiated that deal with CBS Records in early 1976. And CBS initially agreed to pay 18% in royalties split between the band and the producers, which on this album was Scholz and Boylan. Now, a typical manager will only take 20%. Paul Ahern did something else. Following advice from Brian Rohan, the Grateful Dead's famous dope lawyer, Ahern asked CBS to raise the royalty rate to 24%, and he simultaneously added a second free goods clause to that contract, allowing CBS to pay royalties on only 3 out of every 4 albums sold. On paper, the royalty rate went up, but CBS wasn't paying out anything different. For Boston, everything changed. Here's why. Under the original deal, the band would have earned $1.08 for every $10 in wholesale sales, 10.8%, right? Under the revised deal, they earned 81 cents, or 3/4 of 10.8%. Where did the difference go? Not to CBS, but to Ahern, who took home roughly 33% of the royalties now. Free goods became free lunch for Ahern. When Boston's debut exploded and an escalation clause kicked in so that CBS paid more, Ahern got to pocket the difference because there was no matching clause for the band. Between 76 and 79, he collected $1.5 million. Scholz's share of the band's royalties? About $176,000. Scholz didn't fully understand all of the mechanics of this contract. He just knew something was wrong. I placed my trust and faith in Ahern, he testified. It was producer John Boylan who eventually spotted the strange contract language in his own contract and alerted Scholz' lawyer. That discovery set off years of litigation and permanently hardened Scholz' view of the industry. Ahern, who declined to speak with me, later said he regretted how the deal played out. He called it a beginner's deal that spiraled out of control. He was pointing out that the band received some bonuses that weren't accounted for in these numbers, but by the time he tried to make amends with Scholz, the damage had been done. Scholz had lost his faith in the business, the lowest form of life, he later called it. Scholz pushed Ahern aside, but he remained trapped in a punishing contract with CBS, one that demanded 8 albums in 5 years. That fight would culminate in the battle over Third Stage. And that story is where Power Soak really begins. If you want to know how Scholz fought back and why it took 8 years for Boston to reemerge, check out Power Soak, Invention, Obsession, and the Pursuit of the Perfect Sound, available on Amazon, Apple Books, Barnes & Noble, and Kobo. You can also follow updates at powersoak.substack.com. Thanks a lot.